Thank you both. Well, some of you may remember the movie Erin Brockovich. Of course, they gave Julia Roberts her first Oscar, also helped make her a superstar. The film was based on the very true story of the fight against Pacific Gas and Electric Company regarding groundwater contamination from carcinogenic, something I'm not going to pronounce. It was contaminated and made people sick. Residents were suffering from various illnesses, including cancer, of course. Well, investigative journalists from ProPublica have uncovered a similar situation, but one actually that is more widespread, frighteningly enough. This case surrounds uranium mills that were built during the Cold War and are now contaminating the groundwater. Well, Mark Olalde is an investigative reporter who was one of the writers on the ProPublica report, and Tom Hanrahan grew up around some of those uranium mills in question, all in two states, Colorado and New Mexico. And they're joining us here live on Morning Rush to share more about this very troubling story. Gentlemen, good to see you. Good morning. Thanks for time. Mark, we begin with you. Start at the beginning here. When and why were these uranium plants used?
You know, between the 40s and the 70s, the federal government kind of subsidized a uranium market. They needed the uranium so we could process it and put it in nuclear weapons to fight the Soviets in the Cold War, essentially. And until the 1980s, when the market kind of fell out due to safety concerns from 3 Mile Island and falling prices and the lack of subsidies, these mills started shutting down. But for the past 40 years, we've had about 50 uranium mills kind of around the country going through this decommissioning and cleanup process without fully being cleaned up yet.
And Tom, you grew up near uranium mills in Colorado and New Mexico, as we said a second ago, and watched 3 of your brothers suffer through cancer. Why do you believe there's a connection between those illnesses and those mills?
Particularly in Durango, where we grew up in the mid to late 50s. I remember that the tailings from the uranium mill just filtered straight down from the mountainside down into the river, the Animas River. That was the drinking source for the community. And I'm the oldest of 6 children. 3 of us were born before we moved to Durango, but 3 were in utero in Durango during my mother's pregnancies. And it's the 3 of those, the 3 youngest ones, who have contracted the cancers. 2 of them have died, and one of them is going through treatments now. And I just feel that there's a strong connection between the water contamination at that time and my mother's pregnancies.
Wow. That's certainly fascinating and potentially very telling. So, Mark, what's the most, would you say, shocking thing that you've learned here, and what do you want the general public to take away from your incredible reporting here?
Well, this was a problem that was really created before there was a lot of environmental consciousness in the country, and it was created before we really had a lot of regulations on this. The regulatory regime that kind of governs this tailings or mill waste cleanup that Tom was talking about wasn't created until the 70s. So we already had 20 or 30 years of production before we really knew how to, what we should be doing, what were best practices to take care of this issue. And, like at the site Tom mentioned, like at another site in South Dakota, like a number of sites, we used to just dump this directly into rivers or put it directly onto the land in unlined piles like the ones you're looking at on screen. And so it's really this huge legacy that was kind of a war effort. We said, we're going to do this. We're going to have the consequences because, we need these nuclear weapons, and then we need this nuclear power. And, that might have been true then, but now we need to figure out or decide, okay, what do we do now? How do we make the people who suffered from this whole? And, do we need to be cleaning these things up in a different manner? Do we need to be doing them faster? Our investigation found that it takes an average of 35 years to move one of these sites through the cleanup process. And even then, we found that the majority of these sites end up with the waste still in unlined piles, and with the government changing their own groundwater cleanup standards and making them more lax because they've been finding it too difficult to clean up the groundwater to their own levels. And so, do we need to be putting more money to this? Do we need to be putting funds or doing more health studies in the impacted communities. But I think those types of questions really need to be answered sooner rather than later.
And Tom, and I want to come back to that point that you just made there, but Tom, before we do that, do you or your family still live near these mills? Do you know of other friends, relatives, neighbors who've also gotten sick? And based on what you just heard here, which honestly was a very honest but also very hopeless answer, that there's anything that really is being done here, and what's being done takes 35 years, so that's kind of not going to be a huge help to a lot of people anytime soon. Where's your mind and your heart on this issue?
So my family has dispersed. None of us live in the general area. And, I left the area when I was 15 years old, so I don't have friends there. I don't know what impact has affected others who were there at the same time. But I think that, as Mark pointed out, it's very hard to clean up these sites. And there are still millions of people who are affected by it, and we need to try to clean those sites up as best we can. But my other concern is that we are now looking at a new surge in mining to support electric batteries for the electric car industry. And it's going to require huge amounts of lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and we're going to be starting to mine again. And what we did 70 years ago is that we paid for the cost of the extraction in dollars, but we paid for the cost of the mitigation and the cleanup in human lives. And that was based on a war mentality. That's the cost of war. What we need to do now is make sure that we finance these efforts through dollars, through extraction, milling, mitigation, and recovery, so that we're paying for the cost of doing business rather than the cost of war.
It's a constant battle in human existence, the short-term need versus the long-term impact, and this is certainly so indicative of that. And Mark, quite honestly, 35-year cleanup, all the junk goes to another place that gets contaminated, and the government changing its own standards to make it look better than it actually is. Remarkable reporting, not getting a lot of hope from it that things are better, but maybe that's even more of a reason to make sure that this kind of spotlight got on this particular issue. Please come back as things develop. Mark, both of you, Tom, thank you so much for sharing your work and your story. We appreciate it. Hopefully we as a country learn from these kind of conversations. Gentlemen, thank you. Ahead here on Morning Rush.